Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of SEO Fight Club. I'm just breaking out the YouTube chat and saying hello. I'll remind people to ask questions. And last time, I don't think we had enough time for all of them. So if it's important to you, if it's at all urgent, please be sure to ask early rather than late. Um, and we are going to hear from Charles today about how SMX went. So, what is SMX like now that it's owned by SEMrush? And how was it? Is it still kind of vanilla generic or is it awesome? You know, so looking forward to hearing what that was like. All right. So, Charles, you're muted.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if that was my signal to take over.
Yeah, that was your cue.
That's okay. Sharing's turned off, so we're running a we're as
Guys,
always, we're running an amazingly
we practiced
professional.
this for a half an hour before we went live. Half an hour practice, and we still don't have it down.
well, it wouldn't be a show if we had it together.
That is true.
All right, so here we go. Second time's a charm. Um, so I want to talk about SMX Advanced 2025. My goal today really wasn't, I don't want to do a deck and like just kind of speak at everybody. I'd like to do like kind of discussion starters. There were lots of things that I that I heard there, and lots of ideas I heard. I'm like, huh, I would really love if Ted and Lee and Clint and Terry and some of the other folks were here because when I hear some of these things, that was my response sometimes. So so for those of you who may not know, there was an SMX Advanced last week, June 11th to the 13th. It was in Boston. Why Boston? Why not Seattle like it normally is? You may not be able to see at the lower part of my screen. I put in a little thing. Search Engine Land. You may not be aware of, but Search Engine Land is now owned by SEMrush. SEMrush owns Search Engine Land, owns Third Door Media. I think technically Third Door Media owns Search Engine Land and SMX. So SEMrush owns those. I have heard through the grapevine that SEMrush got a bunch of capital, venture capital, or something like that. So I'll be honest. When I first went into this, I was thinking, "Uh-oh, is this just going to be a kind of a pitch session?" The nice thing I learned is that I was a little suspicious. This is my last note here. I was a little suspicious and still am, but I didn't feel there was a drop in quality. It didn't feel like a huge pitch session in any way, shape, or form. I thought all the sessions were pretty good. They were mostly about content, which was nice to see. It
Yeah.
was a small venue, but it was crowded, and that was kind of nice to see the return of in-person conferences. Yeah, Ted, go ahead.
Uh, I would have predicted that there wouldn't have been a drop in quality. I think that would be hard to do because it never really had a lot of substance. I like the ones where they had Google engineers speak because there was ultimately insider leaks in those. Um, but otherwise, I always felt that the talks were kind of vanilla 101, SEO advice, and not backed with test data. So,
So I would agree with that. I guess when I we should define quality. So we've had several sessions where we talked about what do words mean and what do we mean when we say certain words. When I was saying quality, I mean like let's imagine like Lee's running a session and what used to happen. This was like 7 or 8 years ago now. It did get better right before the pandemic, before they stopped doing the in-person conferences. But he would come on, Lee would come on and have a deck. He would have a slide that talked about him and the company he worked for or the company he owned. He would spend about a quarter of his time talking about that and himself and his company. Then he'd spend a little bit of time talking about a subject, and then he'd end it talking about how if you hire him, he can solve all these problems for you. It was basically you were paying to go see an advertisement. And that is why I stopped doing the SMXs years ago because I just got really, really sick of that. Um, I can put up with vanilla content. I can't put up with being paying to be sold to. But they didn't do this. They didn't do that at all, which I was happy to see. There were a few. So this is not really going to be my intention for today. Isn't really going to be a session for session review. I just going to have some thoughts, some things that came up. I thought you guys would like to talk about, and so we can all kind of have a conversation on it. There were a few funny moments. I found funny at least. There were several speakers at multiple times in their presentations declared things like "I predicted this." Um, one even used um, yeah, one even used a prediction. One even used a prediction to prove that he was right about his prediction, which I don't understand how that works. Um, one guy used he opened up a chart from 20 he opened up a thing from 2018 to show that how he was right, but the problem is the deck that he showed didn't prove he was right. When he opened it up and showed it, I laughed out loud thinking he was making a joke. I thought he was making a joke. Basically, I thought the point he was trying to make was, look, we don't know what's going to happen. This is what I predicted 6 years ago, and look how wrong I was. His prediction was how Google Home search was going to take over all of search, and there wouldn't be any other mobile or desktop searches anymore. And I laughed because I thought he was making a joke. And then I realized that nobody else was laughing and he wasn't smiling. I'm like, uh-oh, he thought he was serious. So that I found really humorous. Lots of predictions based on one or two charts and several presentations used poor charts, no 0 points, things on that, which I know, Lee, you and I have discussed
Yeah.
many times.
So funny thing, Charles, I heard a couple of years ago, went to PubCon, same sort of setup, same sort of audience, same sort of speakers. And at one point, Gary Isles from Google was talking, and he was being sarcastic. And it was clear if you understand sarcasm and you followed the logic of his argument. But when he was sarcastic, I laughed quietly, unlike you did. But I laughed quietly because I liked where he was going. And then I watched people taking notes as though he had just dropped a nugget. And, even after he explained the sarcasm, they still didn't get it because he was explaining in that particular case that the disavow file was, a comfort tool, and they didn't really do a whole lot, and it didn't work the way that most people thought, and they overused it and so forth and so on. And, so then people like, wait, what? He didn't really say that, did he? Yes, he did. So I think what I took away from that is that a lot of people at these particular conferences don't, they're very serious. They don't get humor, sarcasm, or anything else. And you expecting there to be humor made you the outlier, sir.
Yeah, he caught me by surprise. I thought he was making, as a matter of fact, I was following him along and I thought, oh, I see where he's going with this joke. Okay, this is
Yeah.
great. And yeah,
You
no.
saw the setup and predicted the punchline.
I saw it all coming, but I was totally wrong. He was being serious. He wasn't making a joke.
Well,
Um,
I hope it was a really loud, joyful laugh that went on for some time, because
it,
that would
it
have been awesome.
it didn't. It was a ha, and then I stopped myself because I realized I was being kind of loud. I didn't want to be rude. And then I realized that nobody else was laughing, and he wasn't like he didn't have like this smile or anything. I'm like, oh, wait a minute, he's being serious. He really thinks he predicted something that didn't happen. Um, so yeah, I, I, I chuckled to myself later about it because I was like, I can't believe that happened. Um, but
Yeah.
anyways, um, so a couple of the subjects. So here's one subject: LLMs.txt. Believe it or not, very few speakers discuss this at all, and definitely not at any length. A few people, one or two people, asked about it, and I realized I just realized I spelled skeptical wrong. Um, most seemed skeptical. I guess that's really a word. Most of the speakers were kind of skeptical of the LMs TXT. They didn't really know much. I don't want to say they didn't know much about it, but they didn't seem to put any weight into it. One speaker did make a good point, said there's really no insight into its adoption or how much it's being used. So they were all kind of like, that speaker specifically, she said she was kind of in a wait and see mode with LMs TXT.
That's kind of why you tested it. Was you
This
wanted to see.
I put this first because I know we tested this and looked at this a week or two ago and
Yeah.
found that really it does get crawled, but it doesn't seem to be getting crawled by any of the, or at least in my amazing one file, one
Yeah.
site test, it didn't get
And
picked up by a lot of folks.
and I would argue that that's not evidence of it being consumed. That's evidence of tricking Googlebot into crawling it.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I tricked Bing and Google to crawl it, and I didn't necessarily prove that it's being used in any way, shape, or form. But I will also say, because it was one file on one site, I'm not going to say, oh, it's worthless now. I expected just the mere presence of the LLMs.txt to open up the floodgates, and that definitely didn't happen.
Well, do you suppose that for those that are a little more technically inclined and do spend a little time looking at the logs like you do, that they haven't seen anybody coming for it? You know, like if
I don't.
you looked at your other sites that didn't have it done just that way, you know, Bing is not looking for it on its own. Google's not looking for it on its own. You're not seeing 404 errors across the board for a whole array of bots looking for this file.
Well, yeah,
Well,
that goes back to the presentation I had a couple months
Yeah.
ago where we found Bing is looking for sitemaps whether they exist or not. And yeah, there was nothing that was looking for LLMs.txt.
Yeah.
and and we still need to do the tests where we put in a gibberish test keyword into an LLMs.txt and, try to find out where it shows up, where it becomes findable. Because if it never becomes findable, then nobody's using it.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, from what I can see, I would agree with the speakers in the sense that there's no insight into adoption. I haven't seen any, like I'm not sure how it would ever get picked up by AI because I haven't seen a single AI bot hit my LLMs.txt yet.
Yeah.
But so
Simon
this I
has
found interesting. A few people asked about it, um, and no one really seemed to. I don't want to say no one knew much about it, but they all kind of said we don't know anything about it. There's no standard that's been set yet.
well, Simon points out you tested that 2 weeks ago. AI is moving so fast that the test could now be invalid.
It could, well, to his point, actually, it could be. So
It could be.
it could be, it could be. Um, so there was a lot of conversations on rankings, impressions, traffic, revenue. Um, one of the folks, a few different folks kind of expressed the same thing that rankings are useless. Um, I've been hearing that for years and years and years, so my defensive kind of come up whenever someone says that. I tend to agree. One speaker mentioned that we're going from a deterministic to probabilistic, whereas you do a search for a keyword, such and such is always going to rank number one, whereas now, not so much. And then I think it was a second person mentioned static rankings versus personalized and or fluid answers.
Yeah, they're starting to catch on to volatility.
Eh, are they? Um,
They're
this
like, it's not always the same.
Well, yeah, I mean there is that. There is that. And we know that. I mean it's been that way from personalized search for a while that things can be a little bit tailored towards the person, but we're going from where we are today to some future state that I'm predicting. That happens every year at every conference. Whether we're talking about AI this or links that or on page this or experience or whatever it is, the topic of the day, everybody has the definitive. We're going from this and here's the direction and you need to be on board of there. And of course, my tool, my agency, my whatever can help you with that. But I'm guessing, actually, I would be betting that there was not a lot of data to support a lot of these uh, current here's where we're headed predictions, because that's what they are, is predictions.
Yeah, in their defense, my big prediction of this year uh, did come true, I feel.
Mm-hmm.
But it also did not have a lot of data. So
Yeah.
my prediction was based on Google's claim that they were really going to bring the change this year, and I feel they have. But yeah, my prediction was I believe that Google was telling the truth on that, and time would tell, and I feel time has told. Uh, but the question is, what did you do with your prediction? Because if you did nothing, then you really didn't believe in it, or what you predicted isn't really all that important. So, what I did with it is I started pivoting my technology, moving the R&D. Um, and so the question becomes, with all these predictions out there, how did that change your game? What do you do now? And I bet there probably wasn't a lot of solutions at the conference.
Yeah. And how do you know it's working? Because if you're pivoting, so like in your particular case, Ted, you're pivoting, you're doing some things, you're changing your stack. Okay, so now you've changed your stack, things are better, or you didn't drop off where everybody else did, right? And so there's that measurement of, we did this thing, we've changed this thing, and here's what we're seeing, to sort of validate that your prediction ain't
Yeah, and
changed.
my success on an architecture pivot is going to be easier to measure than, say, a best practice, because I see a way that Google is blocking us from visibility into what works. So if I gain that visibility back technologically, I feel that is a success. And I feel there are new things that need to be measured. And if I can accurately measure those new things, I feel that is a success. And then I think the best practices will come from the analysis of that acquired data. Um, but yeah, I'm not building necessarily the new best practices. I'm building the tools that get us the data so that then lots of people can take a look at it and figure
Yeah,
out what's going on.
that's fair. But if you go back to Charles' previous slide on the LLMs, oh my God, you're going to have this thing. And, so Charles, like, do you? Let's go find out. And right
Yeah.
now, based on the data that's out there, it doesn't look like that LLMs.txt file is doing a whole lot in any way, shape, or form. It's not increasing crawl, it's not increasing ranking, it's not doing today. That doesn't mean that next week all the major companies adopt announce a wide scale adoption of a certain standard that includes that, and then boom, everybody's crawling the sites that have that and not crawling the sites that don't. you know it's a change, but we've seen too many of these things where, oh, here's the way we're going. We talk about Core Web Vitals, for example. We didn't think that one was gonna. We thought that was gonna be a nothing burger, and it turned out to be a nothing burger. Now we've been wrong about other things as well, but like you said, if you're gonna make a prediction, where's your
Well,
data or where's your action to back that up? I am all in on LMS.txt. I've put actually three of them on every one of my sites. I like them so much. I'm just tripling up.
I agree. And I think that a lot of the SEOs that start putting test keywords into things to find out how they can get those test keywords findable
Mm-hmm.
from different LLMs, they're probably going to have the most impressive presentations in the coming year when they start discovering how they make these test keywords findable in different places. Because that's the information everybody's
Mm-hmm.
just trying to get. And when you start demonstrating, here's how I made this gibberish keyword findable in this AI, and here's how I made that keyword findable in that AI,
Right.
and talking about how long it takes, success rate, failure rates, are there tricks to it? Yeah. I think you're right. When people actually start testing instead of predicting, it'll get a lot better.
And that's one of the hard pieces, going back to Charles using the term vanilla.
Well, I
Charles.
I started that. That was my
Uh,
fault.
well, yeah, he was using it when we were talking before the show as well. But when you look at the vanilla stuff, if I go to this conference, I paid a lot of money, let's say, to go to this conference as an attendee, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, now what do I do when I get back to the office next Monday? Now what? You know,
There's a
that
lot of that I found. A lot of, okay, well, now what do I do? And you're kind of left, and maybe this is by design, you're kind of left with, well, I guess I better hire Lee because I like this presentation. And I don't know if that's by design or if that's just a happy little accident. But there weren't a lot of, some presenters gave some very specific, hey, do this. Do step one, step two, step three, do this. Which I
Mhm.
really always appreciate that. I try to do that in my own decks or presentations, like, okay, here's how you do this. But there were a lot of thought leadership. Now, this whole rankings are useless. You guys are talking about data. One of the things I didn't see, everyone went up there and declared rankings are useless and said, well, we're going from this deterministic to probabilistic, which sounds very sexy. Everyone kind of nodded their heads in agreement. Um, what no one did, and I haven't done this myself, is do a search from their office in California and then their hotel room in Boston, and then have a headless Chrome that's emulating a bot, Googlebot, do the same search. Like no one's demonstrates, say, look how different these rankings are depending upon who was logged in and where they were logged in. I didn't see that. So is that happening? Possibly, probably. I don't know if I've seen a lot of people do that. What a lot of folks did do is they showed how few organic searches or how few organic results are on a page. Um,
Mhm.
I think Will Reynolds from Seer, he had even shown how Google's AI overview, it gives on the upper left-hand side, upper right-hand side of the screen, it gives listings. Apparently that's a scrollable list, but the UX is so horrible, there's no way to realize it's a scrollable list. So if you're not one, two, or three in those citations, no one will know there is a four, five, six, or seven.
I'm
Um,
I'm having a deja vu moment here.
Mhm. I thought you might.
No comment.
so But yeah, I just found it interesting how everyone will agree that rankings are useless. And I'm like, well, has anyone looked at it? Has anyone just confirmed that? Maybe it is. Maybe it's 100%. But if I do a search from my house and Ted does a search from his office and we're on the other sides of the country, are we going to see different things? Maybe, maybe not. And how different are they really, really going to be? And then will Terry see something different from his office or his home, uh, you know, in a different state, not country, state.
Yeah, and I can already tell you there, yes, there is going to be differences because there's volatility naturally in search, and I can already tell you that the widgets that are displayed in the meta search engine, which channel widgets are in that universal search, that has volatility of its own. And so the widget order can also be volatile. And the widgets that are shown can be different between incognito and logged in users. And then there's personalization, and then there's proximity for local. So I'd imagine there could be quite a bit of change in what you're suggesting.
And that would make sense. That would totally make sense. I wouldn't be surprised by it. I just, I was thinking about this, how everyone's declaring rankings are useless. And it's like, all right, well, useless, maybe, but that's also,
Well,
and
not
one speaker also said, just, you'll like this. One speaker said, it's just better to use the Search Console data. Don't use a rank tracker. Um,
well, yeah, so they're right on the rank tracker part. I think they're wrong on the rankings are useless. The thing is you have to qualify the ranking.
yeah,
Which, how many rankings are above the fold? Because there are
yeah,
keywords that still have 4 or 5 organic results above the fold on page one. But there
right.
are keywords where number one is effectively page three. And so I think most SEOs aren't qualifying which keywords are worth going after for SEO and which keywords would kind of be better off with a multi-channel approach.
Yeah.
And so that's the big disconnect on, why did my rankings improve but my traffic went down because of what appeared above the organic.
Yeah,
So
and
that's a perfect segue. Oh, nope, sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
I was going to say, and unfortunately, the thing is, if I go and make five predictions on how things are going to unfold, and one of them turns out to be true, I'm going to remind you about the one and not the other four that were horribly
Yeah,
inaccurate.
Are
that's
you
how I do
suggesting
it.
survivorship bias?
Yeah, just a little.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. No, the old stick a flag in it and then remind everyone of the flag later, but not all the other flags that never amounted to anything.
Yeah.
so, Ted, you gave me a great transition into talking about impressions and traffic. A lot of folks were saying things like we're seeing a decoupling between impressions and traffic. Um, I saw some charts, so there was some field data showing impressions going up and traffic either staying flat or going down. So like a little crocodile. Um, I don't know. I wouldn't call that scientific, but at least people brought some kind of data. A few folks made a declaration that traffic's no longer correlated with revenue, which I don't know if that's a fair thing
Mm.
to say just yet.
It
Um,
it's probably accidentally
I
possible. It's plausible. And
I
the
think it would be
reason,
fair to say organic traffic is no longer strongly correlated with revenue because
well, I think it depends because Google, on all that big change I said that Google was bringing, one of the biggest things they changed was requiring JavaScript rendering to see the search results. And that forced everybody into in our industry into using tools and services that have API calls that rely on headless Chrome to render that JavaScript. And, when you look at the source code differences between the rendered Chrome search result page and the normal Chrome, human visitor rendered page, there's about a 50% difference in the source code. And so, it starts to beg the question, is everybody who's using, these tools and APIs, are they doing SEO for tools and bots? You know, are is there another channel where you could be doing SEO for humans? And so, more research is needed, but I think their point that revenue is no longer predictable by traffic, that could be very plausible.
All right.
uh,
So I'm going to take the other side of this one, Ted. Let's fight.
Okay.
There are several things that are need to be clarified in these statements, and it's not up to Charles to clarify them because he's not the one making the statements. But yes, there are a lot of those gator graphs out there where impressions are going this way, and traffic is not keeping up with impressions. We've seen that. Now, why is that true? That's the question that everybody's got an embedded assumption about why that's true, and that leads them to the therefore here's what's going to happen next, or here's what it all means. So is that decoupling there because there's AI overviews and you're not actually getting the traffic anymore? Is it because the measurement tool is now broken for some of the reasons that you stated, and maybe some of the others that haven't been stated? So you're not measuring that. Is it that the Search Console data, which is where you see the gator graphs, have
And
become less accurate? But if you had Google Analytics data or other
I
analytics data, you would see that traffic,
I don't
live traffic,
disagree
yeah.
that there are many ways that the revenue could be decoupled. I'm not saying there's only one way.
No. I know you're not. But what I'm saying is
Yeah.
traffic and revenue no longer being correlated means that your traffic went down in all of these situations, but your revenue stayed the same or went up. The only
Or
way
your
that
your
happens,
traffic went up and your revenue didn't change. They're not correlated. It could be either direction.
yeah, but he's looking at traffic and yeah, traffic
Yeah,
and
most were
yeah,
claiming so the statement that most folks were making is that impressions were up, traffic was flat or down, but revenue was fine or even up. And
right.
some folks were saying how they were getting clients that were nervous. Oh my God, my traffic's down. They said, "Well, how's your revenue doing?" "Oh, revenue's up across the board." Well, then, all right,
So
something must be happening.
yeah, so how's that possible? Either you're not measuring the traffic or the traffic that you lost was crap traffic and it's been
And that was a
replaced.
point one presenter made that
Yeah,
he was his point was that we've been build a great content for so long, and we've been getting crap traffic for so long that we forgot that we didn't
Well,
realize that none of this
but
traffic was ever driving revenue. It was
what
never driving revenue. It
yeah.
just was, yeah.
but let's just take a moment here and reflect. Let's define our terms.
Mm-hmm.
What is crap traffic? Is
They were
it
defining it
bots?
as
Is it
tr
SEO tools?
traffic that wasn't converting.
Yeah.
Traffic that
Yeah.
had no chance of converting, I guess would be the better term. So it
So
could be of
off,
bots or
yeah,
tools. It could also
untargeted.
be people going to an article that was about something that had nothing to do with buying your product.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, so I would assume that the search result page for a specific keyword is probably at least, reasonably targeted if you know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a decoupling from there, then yeah, it's either, you're not, the impression isn't valid because of something Google's doing, or those aren't human beings that are looking at it.
Possibly. And I see that in log traffic all the time. I see things coming to my site. I'm like, these are not people. These have got to be some kind of bot, some kind of scraper. The assumption overall that was made and declared was that users are top of the funnel traffic is being lost to this AI and LLMs. Users are doing research before they buy. So if I want to buy Quora, if I'm going to buy the Quora, I'm not going to search. I might search Quora, but I will spend my time in the AI overview, in the Reddit threads. I will spend my time reading about it, and then I will do direct traffic or something to Ted's site and buy, and purchase Quora. So he's going to see a so you might see the impressions, but you're not going to see the traffic, but your revenue won't be hurt because I'm still coming to get Quora from you, Ted. I just took a different path.
Yep.
That's
Well,
the assumption or theory that everyone seems to be working on.
well, and there's another piece like the Google announced, I don't know, yesterday, day before, something like that, that Search Console was now going to be including these impressions and from the AI overview and things like that. And like, well, that right there could explain a decoupling of impressions and traffic, because as people get more and more into the AI overview, you're going to get higher number of impressions without the same number of clicks, because the additional searches that you do when you're in AI overview, it's going to give you one, two, three, four, five impressions potentially, and you're only going to get one click out of that
And to
potentially.
make
Well,
matters
and
worse, Lee, one of the things that the one guy Will had pointed out is that you could be getting impressions, but no one's seeing you because you're below
Yes.
this magical little fold in this widget that doesn't no one even knows they can scroll down on,
Well,
and that
that's
could be
deja
hurting you
vu.
even
yeah.
more.
And that's always been the case, because if you look at your search console data, my average ranking position for this particular thing could be 75.3. That nobody ever saw the damn page. They, page
Yeah.
one, page two, and I'm out, sort of thing. So that was always true. But the decoupling of revenue with traffic makes no sense unless somehow magically now you're getting only good traffic, only the good stuff, only the buyers, and you got rid of, all the other crap, or your measurement tool's broken. Something has changed about the way things are being measured.
So that I don't know if I had a slide on that. There was a good presentation. Let me just look real quick. No, it wasn't on there. Um, So there's one guy, Morty, I forget his last name. He does the SEM Rush volatility. I took his things out only because he just talked about other things. But to your point, Lee, he was discussing how volatility seems to have changed drastically with these updates. And as he's going through his numbers, he basically means like we're probably tracking the wrong thing now. It's,
Yeah.
what we were tracking isn't the right thing to track anymore, and that's why the numbers have changed. It's not that Google has massively changed how it rolls out its updates. And he actually spent a lot of time talking about the data, which I really enjoyed that presentation.
Yeah.
But to your point, yeah, there's a very good chance that we're not tracking the right things anymore, or the data coming in is less clean than it was before. It's interesting that most of the folks in the presentations were taking the opposite stance, that now our traffic is all this clean buyer traffic, and before we were
Ooh.
getting all this extra stuff that we didn't really need, which again, maybe that's true, but nobody
Yeah.
had any real hard data to prove that, or even field data in that case.
Yeah. So, that's part of this, just, playing with these three variables, impressions are decoupling from traffic. And here's the reasons. Is it AI is causing that, or is it boosting impressions, or a combination of the two? And then traffic is decoupling from revenue. Is it actually decoupling from revenue? Is it cleaning itself up in some form or fashion? Or is your measurement tool just broken? Which, having spent this many years around TED, I would be inclined to think that your measuring tool was broken, and that's more of an explanation, or it's changed what it's
Or
meant.
yeah, the measurement doesn't mean what it used to mean because
Right.
how things have changed. And that's
So
kind of what's happened is rankings don't mean what they used to mean because how Google changed. And so you have to add other information to rankings to make them meaningful again. And so that can be done. It's just that the old way of using rankings isn't good enough anymore.
there was a lot of conversation about when you can't just look at SEO in a complete silo. You have to be a lot more multi-channel.
Mhm.
Yep.
And we'll talk about a few things. And I think most those points are pretty solid. That trying to look at everything in its own separate silo and not communicating to any of the other channels was always the wrong way to do it. It's just now it's being exposed as being the wrong way of doing it. Um, there was,
Well,
as a
it
postscript to this, there was an article that just came out this morning. I think it's Ahrefs, but I could be wrong. Someone had done some study saying, is there really more top of the funnel people going to LLMs and Google? Is that what everybody's losing? And they showed some data which suggests that that's not what's happening at all. Um, I have a tendency, if somebody has some data as opposed to folks who had no data, I have a tendency to lean towards, okay, the guy with data is probably right. But I didn't read the article. I didn't even
Yeah.
bother putting this snippet in here, just that it is floating around out there. There's already folks that are starting to push back on some of this stuff with data,
Yeah.
which is nice to
Well,
see.
yeah. And
that's
if you want to get ahead of all of this, I'll tell you what I told the people at SEO spring training because I talked about most of this stuff at SEO spring
mhm.
training. Um, yeah, SEO has always been multi-channel. So look at those widgets. Sometimes image SEO is above the fold for a keyword. Then you need to do image SEO to get representation above the fold. Sometimes the related discussion widgets is above the fold. Then you need to go make an optimized Reddit post so you get representation above the fold through that widget. Sometimes the widgets are based off of schema that resides on your page. And so you need to go implement and do a good job on your schema to play in that game. So yeah, SEO is has always been multi-channel, but now you have to actually do multi-channel SEO and you have to
Mhm.
classify your keywords into what opportunities they're best suited for. And I have news for you. Some of them are only pay to play. Some of them are five sponsored ads above the fold. And so, if number one is effectively page three and page down button presses to get to it, then yeah, doing old school SEO on that keyword might never yield traffic. And I bet most SEOs in the world right now are wasting their time on keywords that aren't good opportunities because they don't practice multi-channel marketing.
And I think my takeaway from this was this goes back to our conversation about KPIs. In my mind, it's not that rankings are useless or impressions now don't tell you anything and traffic is decoupled. It's that we should be looking at rankings and we should still be looking at rankings, impressions, traffic, and revenue. Just understand what each one is telling us, understand the strengths and the weaknesses. Your impressions could go up for a lot of different reasons. Your traffic could go down or up for a lot of different reasons. Your revenue could go up or down and have nothing to do with your traffic. You got to understand the KPI. You got to understand what each metric is telling you and understand what your KPIs are.
And
Um,
the traffic is still where it's always been. The traffic is above the fold.
yeah,
And the problem is number one is no longer consistently above the fold.
yeah, yeah.
So,
Being a number one ranker doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get all kinds of traffic. It just to me, a number one ranking just means Google considers this page highly relevant. That's really
Yeah.
all it means anymore.
yeah,
Yeah.
I
And
love that particular thing because even just seeing this chart, this little page that you put up, Charles, I can look at these relationships. Even if you had the graphs on here, I can look at those relationships and come up with half a dozen to a dozen possible explanations for
Yeah,
that
yeah.
without
It's
data. And
so,
yet,
so
a person
mhm.
standing up in front of the room without data is picking one of those dozen explanations and saying, here's the reality of the situation.
I think we're making the same
well,
mistake.
one of
So
the realities, because
10
I'm
years
sure
ago
the
or 50,
one reality they have sometimes that's right. It might not always be what's going on,
Right.
but there's probably a decent likelihood that it's happened.
yeah.
And Um, so yeah, there's a failure of imagination of how many different ways a car can stop running.
Yeah.
It's not always the same problem.
Right.
We're going from worrying only about rankings to now worrying only about revenue. It's like, no, I think they all have a place. They're all a metric that we still need to look at. But
Yeah.
yeah.
You know,
So I
one of the
think
big hey
yeah,
guys,
go
one
ahead.
of the big problems with these metrics is they are now changing at a accelerated rate from what we were used to. So testing is screwed because we don't have any long-term tests yet. It's too soon,
Yeah.
and next week might be too late to test some of the stuff that'll be changed by next week.
Yeah, and so the old school way of testing isn't as useful as it used to be when Google was changing slowly. We could do one-off tests and they'd be relevant for a while. Now you need to have kind of repeating tests. You need to build them in a way that they repeat themselves automatically so you can see when things have changed and how they changed. And so it takes a different kind of testing when you have rapid fire change like this.
Indeed. There was a lot of conversations about answering questions, trying to figure out what questions people are asking. Um, and a lot of conversation about how do you answer a question well. Um, so this is from a couple bunch of different presentations. One was talking about how matching keywords, phrase, broad, exact versus the matching the meaning. Like what is Ted trying to figure out? Um, there was a good presentation. Full disclosure, he's a friend of mine, but I still like that. I would have liked the presentation even if he wasn't a friend of mine. He talked about friction inducing latent unasked questions. He called them flukes. And basically his point was there's known questions, but there's also the unknown questions. And he gave a lot of examples about trying to figure out what are the unknown questions that people are asking and try to answer these questions in your content, so that you can give them foresight into the solution. And the example he used was someone going back to school online. Who's going to look after the kids while I'm trying to do class on the computer? Like nobody talks about it, but it's an issue. And so he discussed coming up with these unasked questions. Someone from one of the guys from SEM Rush, I actually really liked. He talked about making great winning content with AI. Those might be a little bit my words, but he talked about the different parts that have to go into if you're going to write really good content with AI.
Oh,
We talked about expert built prompts. Yeah, I'm sorry, Ken,
before
you're
we
going.
get into this
Yeah,
one, can I comment on the last one?
fire away. Yeah.
A nugget drop for finding the unanswered questions is to use AI. It's actually
Mhm.
really good at looking at the negative information space of a piece of content. So you would set up your prompts to say, given this web page content, write a list of questions that customers might ask that aren't answered by the content I've provided. And it'll actually write a bunch of really relevant questions that aren't answered by your existing content. So yeah, there's a lot of good things you can do with AI and at least discovering the questions. You don't have to use the AI content, but you can find the negative information.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and he actually did bring that up. He talked about using AI. He talked about if you can talk to customers. But yeah, he went through a whole process of how to find out these unknown unknowns, questions that people don't know to ask. Um, I again will use the example of Cora. I'm going to get Cora. I know to ask, hey, can I, run it on my machine? Can I have, can I have it on multiple machines? Those are obvious questions. Questions I might not know to ask are, does it perform differently different times in the day, or if I use one API versus another API, like those things I wouldn't know to ask those questions, but they are important questions to answer. And his point was they create friction in the buying process because even if people don't explicitly know there's a question, if the page just says, all right, you got to buy this because it's really good, there's this, well, how do I know it's good? How do I know it's going to solve my problems? There's that kind of not easy to touch kind of, oh, there's an issue out there where it doesn't really answer all the questions. And there's still people don't even know that they have questions, but there is a question, like they don't feel like, okay, this has answered everything for me.
Yeah, there is a marketing persona where good documentation helps people feel more comfortable with your
Yeah.
product. But there is a marketing persona that'll never read the effing manual too. So yeah, just know who you're marketing to, know your
Yeah,
audience.
exactly. No, I think that's a good point. Um, so one of the guys from SM Rush presented. He talked about writing good content, and he talked about the parts that need to go into the prompt or the process for writing the content with AI. He started off with the expert built prompt, and he talked about how you have to really break it down and lead. This is something I know you and I have talked about how, and you've shown me some things you're doing where you're breaking down your prompt, you're making it extremely cleared. He talked about unified data, which essentially was just like internal data. Maybe I should put that. So take the data that you have that others may not have and provide that to the AI. He talked about putting in brand wisdom and expertise, your personal expertise or your company's expertise. So not just asking AI to be the expert, but you provide AI with data, you provide AI with your brand voice, you provide AI with your brand expertise and how you solve these problems, and then let that content get produced. So now it's more branded content. Now it's not just generic AI spit it back out, but it's really more with your voice, with your information, with your knowledge, with your expertise. And I kind of like that. I thought that was a better way of approaching AI content.
I agree.
Yeah, I figured everybody agreed someone would say, I think. So there was a lot of people talking about focus on the brand. So if Marleno's out there listening, you would have freaking flipped out in most of these presentations because people are talking about, oh yeah, brand's important, guys. We should have been doing this all along. And I could hear Marleno flipping out in the back of the room saying, who you are, what you doing, where you do it. But Yeah, so there was some good conversations about brand overall, but yeah, focus on the brand. Don't forget about your brand. The last presentation talked about, or the last slide was talking about the folks put the brand, put your brand voice and your brand expertise into your content. Brand decay. One guy talked about brand decay is the silent killer of traffic, and he talked about not targeting your natural audience, wrong or fake user engagement on social, meaning only internal people are commenting. And then he started getting into some real good things with data and how you can check these things. So like are there lingering reputational issues, a disconnect between ads and content? So he showed a couple examples where folks were running ads, but if you went to their website didn't talk at all about what the ad was talking about. So the landing pages were all askew. How do you monitor some of this stuff?
Hold on a
Um,
second. The
yeah.
the concept of brand decay, that says, okay, my brand was here and now it's sliding.
Mhm.
The cause of the slide, did he go into, those
Yeah,
sort of.
yes, he calls them to how ways to monitor it. So I threw all this together
Yeah.
last minute last night, so you can see with the spelling problems and the punctuation. Some things are a little messed up on this deck, but what some of the ways he talked about how to monitor this. Um, so one of the things he talked about was I don't know what my first looking for complaints. I think looking for complaints in queries was really what it was. So he showed an example of AT&T versus Verizon, which I caught my attention. Me and like, oh, I worked at Verizon. I know what the Verizon keywords looked like. And one of the top keywords he talked about that Verizon got was customer service, Verizon customer service. And he asked the question, do you think people that are Googling Verizon customer service are happy customers? Um, and so he talked about how you can monitor this kind of stuff. He also mentioned looking at the sentiment of queries, and you can use AI to analyze the sentiment. He looked at using the sentiment percentage of the branded queries. So you can look at the sentiment of all your queries, but look at, okay, of just your branded queries, what are the sentiments? How much negative versus positive sentiment? Um, the varieties of branded queries. Are you just typing in Nike shoes? Or are you typing in Nike Nike headbands, Nike socks, Nike pants, Nike, hoodies? Are what kind of what's the variety of the branded queries you're getting? And then he also mentioned benchmarking negative questions about competitors against yourself. So really looking at that sentiment, looking at the sentiment of your branded queries, and then looking at your competitors. And again, he kept using like AT&T and Verizon as examples where Verizon had a lot of negative questions, a lot of negative sentiment around the keywords, around the branded keywords, whereas AT&T didn't have that much. They had some, but it was nowhere as near as much. And that's a way of seeing whether you have a brand decay problem happening. Um, and then he talked about looking at using like something like Google Trends. You can track some of the top negative questions or negative sentiment branded queries over
Now,
time. Are they going up? Are they going down? Yeah.
is it actually brand decay if your sentiment is just flipping from positive to negative? I'd say that the brand is still equally known, but it's not necessarily decay. I think there's a couple dimensions here because decay to me makes me feel like it's being diluted and not known as well, or what's findable isn't as on point. But yeah, sentiment shift, that's different. That's,
Mhm.
we could almost make one of those cool uh, charts where you show it in multiple quadrants.
Yeah, having been an enterprise, as I'm listening to him talk about these things, I'm like, wow, this actually is really good information. The problem I would see with the information is not that it's not good, but you'll present this to folks above you, and they won't know what to do about it, and or they'll want to do the wrong things. And Lee, we've talked about this before, where Oh, too many people are searching for our phone number. Let's just take the phone number off the website. That'll solve the problem. It's like, no, that doesn't solve the problem. That just stops people from calling.
Well, and do you want to be out in front of the keyword Verizon customer service, or do you want to let somebody else be out front with that?
Well, so that was, well, we use Verizon as the example because I worked there and I had that exact same question issue. So they wanted to take, people were typing in Verizon toll free, Verizon number, Verizon contact number, and folks didn't like that because phone calls were expensive. And my point to them was exactly what you said, Ted. It's like people are searching this whether we like it or not. If we don't show up for these terms, someone else is going to, and they're probably going to say something about us that we don't necessarily like. So let's make sure that we show up for it, and let's give people a path. That's if people are typing in the toll-free number, give them a page to land on, but offer chat, offer, nowadays offer AI chat, offer them solutions. And if they really, really want to call somebody and yell at somebody, that's fine. We have to give them that, but let's give them solutions that have lower friction, that they can, get the answers to their problems as fast as possible. But but yeah, I agree 100%. And I also know that while this is invaluable data that folks in the C-suite will say they love, they really won't know what to do with it, and it will end up making you a lot of enemies across the brand because you've just exposed that everyone's been asleep at the wheel. They've allowed this negative sentiment to slowly build over years, and you'll be able to show with charts that if people are Googling McDonald's sucks and it's been going up for 10 years now, who's let that happen? That should not have been allowed to happen. Let's see. I think this is the last one. So one guy talked about, I think it's the second, the new content. This is actually, I put this together a little bit. I changed it, the new content strategy. I think the number one thing to do now, and this really made me think is if you're going to build content, brand it. No more third person non-branded content on your website. We know the AI is grabbing the content off the website. We know it's displaying it in the LLMs or AI overviews. Brand your on-site content so that when it's grabbed and used by other folks, your brand is all over the place. Um, Brand it. They talk about structuring your content, which hopefully everyone's doing that just for good SEO purposes, but it's helpful for the LLMs. Chunk it, meaning it talked a little about the good old fashioned passage indexing, how we're answering very specific things all together, and then distribute it. Folks did say, hey, don't have this content just sitting on your website. Have it in a bunch of different places. Um, it was funny. Somebody pointed out, oh, well, Levi's has a great strategy because they have all these subdomains. And I asked her, I'm like, well, how long is this brand new? Like, oh no, they've done this forever. It's like, okay, so they don't have an AI strategy. They just have a strategy that happens to work in this environment. But they did talk about how, distribute your content as many different places as possible because, the LLMs, they're grabbing this information. And I think Lee, you've talked about it in the past,
Mm.
in the AI world, how do you convince, an AI that you are important? You got to flood the zone. You got to be every place.
Yeah.
If AI finds you every place, well, then you must be important.
All right. Well,
Oh,
thank
no, that
you.
was the last one. Yeah, that was
That's
it.
the
So,
last one. Anything to announce?
nothing for me. Obviously, if people want to ever get a hold of me, they can get a hold of me. I have my QR code there. They can just scan it. But there were other
That
things the folks talked about at SMX. Those are the kind of I want to take like the big takeaways. Like these are the big things they were talking about. There were a couple really good presentations that had nothing to do with AI, and I love those presentations. Um, but they didn't really fit into here anyplace, so I didn't bother bringing it up.
All right, let's see. How do you go about deciding how much to charge as an SEO consultant? I've been told I should be charging much more, but not sure the best way to go about this. Well, the first thing you ought to do is go over your finances because you have to pay the bills and you have to have a sustainable business. So you can find your floor by looking at what you need to cover every month. And so your pricing should be based on your ability to continue doing this line of work. So that's the absolute minimum. Um, and so yeah, from there it goes up. You start thinking about the value you're contributing. So you're contributing more value to some customers than others. Like some stand to make a whole lot of money off of your work, and it's okay to get a piece of that. And so, and some work is going to be harder than other work, and it's okay to get paid for that. Um, so, there are some keywords that will take twice as much SEO as other keywords. And if you're able to discern that, which we can with data, then you should probably charge more for those keywords. Some keywords, if you rank them all the way to number one and walk away, 2 months later, you won't be number one anymore. So they require ongoing maintenance. And so you should charge for that. But just know that there are many, many different situations. And so one pricing idea probably isn't going to fit all situations. And so,
Mhm.
you kind of need to look at what you're getting into before you quote a price. So the quality of, that free audit that you do before you take them on as a client, that needs to be really dialed in. And there are going to be some clients that you probably shouldn't take because they'll have so many technical SEO issues that your ability to rank them is going to be very sketchy at best. At which point, you should probably refer them to someone who has the SEO and development chops to help them, and then tell them to come back and for the lower cost SEO, ongoing. Um, there are there are just clients that won't be able to afford it. They'll have a budget, they're gonna be $500 to $1,500 a month, at which point it's a game of hours, and you have to say, hey, look, it's all about how many hours I can dedicate to doing SEO for your site, and at that rate I can't put in enough hours to do a good job. And so, you just have to explain to people, the reality of the pricing. What do you guys think?
Well, I would say if Charles holds up a pen and he goes, "How much, for this pen?" And I say, "I'll give you $100,000 for it." And the reason I would give him $100,000 for it is because that is a Charles Taylor pen. I am a collector. I'm a fan of all things Charles Taylor, and that particular pen was used at his desk for weeks. So it's in use. It's Charles used the damn thing. Somebody said, "Well, what would you pay for Ted Kubaitis pen?" I was like, "Oh, you can't give those fucking things away. It's just Ted.
Yep.
It's not Charles." And so, it's worth $100,000. But then Terry comes along and goes, "Charles, I'll give you $150,000 for that pen." And I'm like, "Shit, it's not worth that." Well, that's just market forces out there. Now, I'll tell you, a lot of SEOs out there, I see them where you can build up a huge roster of clients at $50 a month, but it's not a good business model. So you have to look at what are the market forces out there. How can you position yourself in a way that your pen's worth $100,000 versus a free giveaway, and can you make money doing it? And are you happy doing it that way? So a lot of people will charge a little to get a bunch of clients, and some people will charge more and have fewer clients, but it might take longer and your cash flow might fluctuate a little bit more with those. But
Yeah, and you have to think realistically about how big your roster can be. So if you don't have staff, if you haven't documented your procedures,
mhm.
if it's just you, I knew I know that when I was doing client work, five was about my limit. I'd start dropping the ball after five. And so you have to look at those finances that you have to deal with every month, divide it by five, and that's what each of those clients needs to be paying in order for this business to not go under.
Mm.
So yeah. This is an answerable problem. You just have to break out the spreadsheet and run the numbers.
So, sometimes and this is something I've run into a lot in the last few months that I've been starting my business is I'll have people occasionally they'll say, "Oh, well, that's a lot." And first of all, that's a red flag to me when someone tries to get me as cheap as possible. It's like, all right, well then they might not value, but typically what I'm doing is I'm going to medium-sized agencies and or medium-sized e-commerce sites. They know they need SEO, but they're not really ready to hire a full-time SEO. They know if they need a good SEO, they're going to be paying an easy six figures, probably closer to, 125, and that doesn't count any benefits or anything other stuff. So it's going to be an easy 150,000 a year. They're going to be hiring somebody, or they can hire me as a consultant. I am a fraction of that, but I'm not on their staff all day long. They're going to talk to me once a week, or we have, email conversations or something. And that's all they need. They have a team, they can implement stuff. They just need someone that can find the problems and give them the solution. Like, hey, do this, this, and this, or I see a problem with your crawls, do this, or I see a problems with, oh, there's a decoupling of your impressions and your traffic. So I dug into it, and what's happening is you're getting more lower rankings for all these keywords, but you're not on page one. So that's why your impressions are going up, but your traffic hasn't increased. What can we do to increase your traffic or increase your rankings to increase your traffic? Um, and then it's me stepping back saying, all right, your content team knows what needs to happen. I don't have to be involved in it. So I have found ways that how can somebody, how can Ted afford Charles without going broke? Because I don't want to make clients go broke because that doesn't do anything for me. But I also do explain the value. Like if you were going to hire me or hire any SEO, this is what you'd be paying. Um, and make sure they understand that. So when they try to say, "Oh, I'm going to pay $500 a month for SEO," okay, you want a $6,000 a year employee? You couldn't get someone to clean your house for that probably. And if you did, they might not do that great of a job. So why would you expect better from an SEO? And if they're really adamant that they think they can get SEO cheap, go away because to Lee's point, it's not a sustainable business. It's not going to work and you're going to have nothing but trouble. And the $500 a month client is going to want to talk to you every single day. They're going to want to have constant meetings. Um, that's you don't want to do that. I have one client, it's my lowest cost client. I won't say any numbers or anything, but I told him right off the bat, I said, look, I'm willing to do this. We're not having any meetings. I'm not giving you reports. I'm not doing all this. I said, this is what's going to happen. He was like, that's fine. I just need someone to take care of these things for me. I'm like, okay, as long as we're going into this eyes wide open, then everyone can be happy.
All right, let's see. I have implemented Q&A pages, same URL pattern as Reddit, no link on pages. It's doing great. Yeah, I like the idea of when you're trying something new, find somebody who's very successful with that thing and emulate what they're doing. Uh, I approve of that all the time. Definitely leverage other businesses' R&D budgets. You know, totally good idea. Just be smart about it and just understand that you may not understand all the variables. But as far as, starting with no ideas and inventing your own or starting with something that's already working, I know which one I'd pick.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
No, it's a good one. I have an appointment that I have to go to, gentlemen, so I'm gonna have to bounce, but I'm gonna have Terry be a proxy for me here. Terry, please fight with these gentlemen. Represent
Yeah,
me well.
you're muted. You're
Terry is
pulling a
muted.
Lee.
Thank you, sir. Bye,
No,
gentlemen.
don't say anything. Let them talk on mute the whole time. Take it easy, Lee.
All right. How to get more traffic. There's lots of ways you can get traffic. You can buy it, you can bot it, you can get a billboard out on the highway, and that'll increase your brand searches. You can send out spammy emails and hope that people will click to the emails. Um, you can you can trick people, so you can use clickbait. You could also do these old school things where you use an iframe on an article, say about a political figure, and then you go to an online community with 100,000 people that don't like that political figure, and you say, can you believe what political figure is doing now? And you share this link, but because you iframed it on your own page, you have an ad at the top. And now you're getting 100,000 people looking at the news and seeing your ad. You know, there are old school websites that do exactly that. Um, So yeah, there's a lot of ways to get traffic. People are getting into guerrilla marketing about it. So uh, there are people that are creating, joke websites, and they'll put a QR code in bathroom stall doors, get the joke of the day. And, somebody in there is going to QR code the joke of the day. Um, there are people that are being black hat about it. So they find popular QR codes out in the world, and then they'll take those and wrap them. There'll be an iframe and then a banner ad. So now people are going to get a menu, and there's a free ad spot because they swapped the QR code. Um, yeah, traffic. There are many, many, many ways to get traffic. SEO is but one. And so, yeah, be creative. People who invent new ways of getting traffic often get the best results because they own those new ways all to themselves. What do you think, Charles? How do you get traffic?
Yeah, I'm an organic guy, but not organic just in the sense of like, hey, it shows up on Google. But how do if someone wants to, I want to make sure that if someone's going to talk about X and I'm an expert on X, I show up. So if someone wants to talk about migrations, I'm showing up about migrations. I'm talking about it. I want to make, I want to attach myself to a subject matter. Um, so.
What about you, Terry?
I uh, I go just the opposite of Charles. If somebody's going to be talking about X, I'm going to go find out where all those people that are talking about X are and show up there, instead of them having to come to me because I know about X. I can Google or ask AI for forums, blogs, channels on any social media about X, except maybe X, and join those groups. Get there and uh, either say I'm an expert or say I don't know anything. Talk to me about it and find out what they want to talk about before you or one of your personas comes back as with those answers. But yeah, plenty of ways to get traffic.
All right, let's see. Is anyone out there still using CTR manipulation and getting good value for the money? I think most of the results that are, you know, talkable are in local SEO. So in the normal SEO space, CTR hasn't been as rewarding by any means. Most people that are doing CTR manipulation, if you haven't been trained on it, you're probably doing way too much of it. So the numbers that work are very small numbers. So if you bought a CTR solution and you went to town, you're doing it wrong. Um, but yeah, I'd say there are still people out there advocating it. Most of them are in local SEO. Let's see.
I would
Um,
suggest when it comes to CTRs, if you find a CTR that works, so let's just pretend that typing in Ted Kubaitis brings up his website, and therefore, and then clicking on it means his website does better in the rankings. I'm just pretending here. That's not how it really works. Instead of trying to manipulate that, figure out how can you get customers to do that for you automatically. How can you get more people, so if I were Ted, I'd say, how can I get more people searching me in Google? And that way, because if you're manipulating it the second you turn it off, it's going to go away. If you can get customers to start behaving in that fashion, then it never really turns off. It's always working for you. And it's natural, so Google can't ever penalize you for it. So my answer is anytime you find a tactic or a trick, figure out how can I get this to happen organically or naturally, and you've got a more sustainable marketing strategy.
let's see. What are your thoughts on using Google image search categories as entities with logical filtering applied in countries where entity extraction via text razor Google API is not supported? I think there's a couple questions in that, and so let's kind of unpack each one. Using image search categories, if you're working with Google's understanding to try to perform better in Google, I think that's a good thing. We do that in multiple places in SEO where we look at what Google is presenting in the search results to figure out how we should be looking at our pages. Things like the variations, the keywords that Google makes bold in the search results are an example of that. Or looking at the featured snippet, is there a direct answer to the question? And I just noticed here, this is kind of funny. My kids turned on the eyebrow filter on this. Those aren't my normal eyebrows. Those are AI eyebrows. So they got me. I'll leave it up. It looks better than my normal eyebrows. Can't see my scar here as much. Oh, my finger has an eyebrow. That's pretty funny. All right. So yeah, using Google's understanding of a topic is great. With All right. So the other part is what do you do about entities where the language isn't supported by the entity tools? All right. The entity tools are basically the 16 most popular languages. But if your client is in Vietnam, you're kind of hosed because none of those tools work for you. There's a few avenues you can go down. You can use LSI keywords, and I know most of the world is going to scream, charlatan, you know, don't listen to them. LSI keywords and entities are exactly the same thing. They're just words that co-occur on pages that rank well. The only difference between LSI keywords and entities is LSI keywords are acquired statistically and entities come from graph databases. Um, and so those are the two different things to understand about it. And when people are very negative on LSI keywords, they never have an answer to the question of what do you do for people in Vietnam. And so the things you can do is you can use LSI keywords because they get you to the same answer set. It's a little more work using LSI keywords. The entity solution is a more direct path, but still work on that path. Um, And you could also get the entities in English and translate them to Vietnamese, but I wouldn't use Google Translate to do that because that doesn't work well. But if you speak the language that isn't supported, then you could probably do a better translation than Google Translate. Um, and so yeah, those would be the kind of things to do. The other thing you could do is create your content with AI. And so if you do that, your LSI and entities are usually really good to begin with because AI is very good at entities and LSI. It's weak on exact match and variations. What do you think, Charles?
Yeah, I was gonna heckle you and say, but John Mueller said they don't use LSI. But yeah, if you whether you're using LSI or TF-IDF or Yake or one of these tools, you're gonna find the overlap for these keywords is pretty much always there. I would always warn folks to, don't forget to use your brain. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people said, "Oh, it says I should have the word privacy policy on my page." Maybe, or is it just that all your competitors have a privacy policy and you don't have one? That could be a completely different issue. Or I need to, I have a competitor. I have Terry Power needs to show up on my page now because he's showing up as an LSI word. It's like, well, do you really want to put your competitors' names on your keywords? Maybe not. Um, so yeah, just use your brain when you're writing content and doing keyword research.
And do use AI because AI speaks those languages. So it can take it from English to that language, even if your major entity databases don't.
Let's see. Since Google Search Console doesn't show us everything, what do you use for the most accurate SEO dashboard? Well, it depends what you're after. So if you're looking for site entries from Google that are not Googlebot, your weblogs are going to tell you that, but they won't tell you the keyword. If you're looking for how much revenue you've accrued in a time period, well, you're probably better served with the reporting from your payment gateway where they don't lose pennies versus e-commerce reporting and analytics. If you're looking for uh, search volume type things, then you probably want to use Google Trends and you compare a keyword you know well to keywords you don't understand well, and then you get a relative indicator of how they differ. From there, the problem with Google Search Console is that it's highly sampled. And Google says this. They say they give you some of the good examples, some of the average examples, and some of the bad examples, but they don't give you everything. And when I go and look at clients' uh, Google Search Console, it's very common that I'll find things that they rank number one for in Google isn't represented in the Search Console data. So if you can rank number one for it and it doesn't even show up in Search Console, that's telling you your data's very incomplete. And so you have to think about the kinds of questions you can ask of data that's very incomplete. And so you can diagnose issues. And so Search Console is good for diagnosing technical things. You can ask, general things like, what does Google generally think my site is about? Um, you know, but yeah, you can't do a lot of things on it. If you're getting paid commissions on overall traffic to a site and you're using Search Console to figure out what you should be paid based on that, you're probably missing a lot of income. So, and if you're bragging to the customer about what you've done, you're probably missing a lot of bragging rights if you're using Search Console as the measuring stick. Any thoughts on that?
No, I was just gonna say kind of what we talked about earlier. I use different metrics based on different times in the campaign. And early on in the campaign, I'm looking at rankings and impressions as a barometer. Am I going in the right direction or not? But that's not my be all and end all. I really want to know traffic and eventually either, leads or sales for the client. Um, but yeah, I have lots of clients. I have a client who wants to talk about sales, and then as soon as I dug in their sales numbers, they had an attribution problem. And they spent 2 months fixing their attribution problem. It was like, if you want to hold me to sales, that's fine. I'll happily be held to sales. I want to make sure it's being attributed properly. And then we're comparing. And then I had to explain to them that not only do we have to fix the attribution, but then we have to adjust for it if we want to do year-over-year comparisons. Because now you're comparing different numbers to each other, and it's going to make some channels are going to look good, some channels are going to look bad, and not necessarily accurately. So, um,
Yeah,
your
and
data.
usually when I go to Search Console, it's not for some reporting need, it's because a page isn't ranking and I need to figure out why.
Yeah, I'll usually use analytics, but you've talked about it many times, Ted. And even analytics is lossy.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Let's see. Any listing strategy for a new e-commerce store? Um, let's see. Do I have to list a small amount in the beginning of, oh, so products per day, I'm guessing? No, no. Google's gonna handle that just fine. So, if you know, if you have 5,000 products, I mean, you're going to have 5,000 pages. And just know that your initial crawl budget's probably going to be like 2,000 pages. So you would have to look in the web logs at how frequently Google is coming back. And so, if Google's coming weekly or if Google's coming monthly, then you can kind of figure out how many weeks or months it'll take for all of your pages to get processed. But a small site that's 5,000 or less pages, it's going to be pretty quick most of the time. I wouldn't worry about it. And it's natural for a new store to list all their products all at once. So I think every store on earth, when they made their first website, did that. One of the most natural things for a new store to do. So I would not slow the rollout of products to customers. I would do it all at once. Um,
you get all that out, but what I would say they have to be aware of and make sure that Google's only crawling their products. Because what will happen, especially with e-commerce, is you'll find your add to cart button, your page facets, your search, all that stuff Google start got. That's what you don't want Google crawling. The stuff that you don't want to, if you don't want to rank it, you don't want Google to crawl it. So keep the page facets, keep the add to carts, keep the search menus, keep all that stuff out of Google. And there's various ways, using buttons, JavaScript to keep Google out of these things.
yeah, exactly. Let's see. Yeah, yeah. So you don't need to do a staged release of products. So I wouldn't worry about it. Let's see. I feel like the image search changed. It is now showing something similar to the knowledge panel. I'd have to go back and check. Things are changing so much, I might not have noticed a change. Also, on the variation subject, what do you do when it comes from other language like, um, let's see, bolded protein and protein terms? In Spanish, the site's ranking for non-Spanish words. Yeah, it gets interesting when you're on a operating system and a browser that has default language English and is sending the accepts language header for English, but your query is in Spanish. You could be sending mixed signals. So just know that the World Wide Web is a Wild West, and what languages things claim to support and claim to be in may not be honored. Some pages will have mixed content where parts will be in Spanish, parts will be in English. So yeah, the sadly the web is a wild west, and sometimes you see that in the rankings. All right, that's it for today. Thanks, everyone, and we will see you next week. If you're looking for more content to consume, please consider SEO This Week. That's Clint Butler's show. Go check it out. And also, GBP Roast. That is all about local SEO. Both are on YouTube. Check them out. And the SEO video show, that's another good one to check out. So check them out. Take care, everyone.